Welcome to the Digital Marketplace, an Apollo and Charles Russell Speechlys art law briefing video. I'm Thomas Marks on behalf of Apollo, and in this short film we'll be discussing the momentum of both the digital marketplace for art and the market for digital art itself. We'll be exploring the extent to which recent technological innovations, from online viewing rooms to NFT sales, might make for a radical restructuring of the art market, and the ramifications, legal or ethical, for artists, buyers and sellers. Before we begin the discussion, a message from Apollo's partners at Charles Russell Speechlys and specialist art lawyers and partners in the firm, Tim Maxwell and Rudy Capildeo, are going to say a few words.
I'm Tim Maxwell and this is Rudy Capildeo, head of the art and luxury team at Charles Russell Speechlys. We're delighted to partner with Apollo on a 3-video series of talks encompassing museum governance, digital marketplace and artists in the world.
Charles Russell Speechlys is an international law firm with offices in the UK, France, Switzerland, Luxembourg, the Middle East and Hong Kong. Our art and luxury team is top tier. We love looking after our collectors, creators and curators to protect the assets and objects that they love. We hope you enjoy the video.
Our speakers bring perspectives from first-hand experience of participating in the art market and its infrastructure through digital technologies, as well as legal expertise. Bernadine Bröcker Vida is CEO and co-founder of Vastari Group, an online platform that connects private collectors with curators and exhibition venues to facilitate exhibition loans. She's a vocal proponent of technological innovation in the art world through initiatives that include, among others, co-organising the first Art and Tech Summit at Christie's on blockchain in 2018. Aleksandra Artamonovskaja is founder of Electric Artifacts, a studio and advisory for projects at the intersection of art and the blockchain. And she's also ambassador for .art, the top-level domain zone, which she helped to launch as part of the core team in 2016. Rudy Capildeo is a partner at Charles Russell Speechlys, specialising in art law and luxury assets, predominantly with a commercial focus on matters such as the purchase and sale of artworks, luxury asset financing, and the protection of intellectual property. It's great to have all three of you with me. Let's kick off with this question I alluded to in the introduction, this sense that things have changed quite a lot. Bernadine, let me ask you, is it fair to say that in the pandemic, so where are we in September 2021, that in the last 18 months, the digital art market has really grown up?
I think it's a really interesting question, and we can look at the digital art market in two different ways. We can look at it as the digital art market, so the market for digital art, and the digital art market in terms of the art market that has gone digital. And I think both have grown immensely over the last 18 months.
So, I mean, in terms of growth, so that's growth in sales, but you feel like infrastructurally, yes, both of these things have really developed a lot in that last year and a half.
Yeah, I think that the overall feeling within the art world, specifically in the art market, looking at digital tools that they used, they were maybe clunky, maybe not integrated into their working processes. Even the concept of working remotely was kind of beyond many art businesses. And over the last 18 months, that's just improved. And the offering has increased, tools have developed, and people have understood how technology can really help them.
Aleksandra, from your perspective, has everything just moved into fast forward in the last couple of years in this area?
I would say definitely with the advent of COVID and the rise of the cryptocurrency, we saw an unprecedented shift from the tech industry and the art market sort of to coincide. Because if you look at the traditional art markets, yes, it has grown immensely and we see that there's a shift towards online, but also we saw a new way of buyers and creators who have entered, so to say, the art market that we'll be discussing today, And I think this was the biggest difference, and this is one of the biggest drivers for the art market to also hurry up and be on board with it.
So finally, we're talking about new points of access and fewer traditional barriers to access. And I suppose before I move on to Rudy to think about some of the legal implications of this, that in a sense, what we're talking about is trust in the digital art market. Would you say, or at least people having the sense that it's something that they can have confidence in, perhaps for the first time?
Yeah, I think in order to have confidence in the art market online, you need to have some form of transparency. And I think that definitely a lot of processes within the art world rely on a bit of mystique, opacity, confusion, and so many tools have come together that are actually making it much more accessible. New buyers are bidding at auction houses, new artists are starting to produce work, and it just, digital tools have made that more accessible. But I think also in the space that I'm in with exhibitions, you've seen that digital content can really bring a lot of art alive. So museums have started engaging with digital content ranging from interactive things relating to art and collectibles, or even digital art itself that is interactive, immersive, a different type of standard that is engaging newer and younger audiences.
Let's just go back to what you discussed at first, Bernadine, which is dividing up what we're talking about into the digital infrastructure for selling traditional art and the market for purely digital art, both of which have moved in different ways in the last 18 months. In the first section of that, it seems to me that confidence has grown. I think the recent half-year report, Art Basel and UBS, suggested that something like an average of 7% of sales are now digital for art across the board. And that includes a high net worth level or high value objects. Did that surprise you? That's a sort of quadrupling of where things were before the pandemic.
Exactly, and I think that I used to give a presentation before the pandemic talking about the aspirations of the art market 20 years ago, saying that you'd be able to buy a Van Gogh online in 1999, and that didn't happen. And I think that it just has changed now. I think that what was impeding it was digital literacy within the sector, the capabilities of tools. So we now are in what some would call Web 3, where you have the Internet of Things, you have artificial intelligence, you have virtual reality and blockchain, which really heightens what's possible with digital tools. And as a result, it's exciting what's possible.
I want to get on to some of the modes of operating that you've discussed there, particularly the relationship between the art world and the blockchain. But just to throw back to Aleksandra, this feeling of things being possible, and you often hear people saying, the art world is becoming more democratic through increased digitization. Is that something that you can really put yourself behind that statement? Do you really believe it?
I would say yes. If we're talking about the digital asset marketplaces that are solely operating on the blockchain technology, you see the idea of scarcity being developed thanks to the immutability of blockchain, which means that artists are able to issue artworks that normally would be replicable in limited editions, providing the sort of confidence among buyers. But also, all those marketplaces have the prices 100% transparent. So if you go to one of the top 5 marketplaces like OpenSea or SuperRare, you can see the whole history of transaction for an artist. You can see the price, you can see the offerings, which gives a big confidence to the buyers, new, but maybe old buyers as well, that they're not going to be tricked into something that might not be true.
So I suppose a democracy might be measured in terms of accessibility and in terms of transparency. So let's bring in Rudy and think about this statement of transparency that we often hear. Does it ring true to you when we're talking about either the sales of art through digital means or perhaps even the sales of digital art digitally?
To turn back to what Bernadine said about the digital marketplace. So that's the marketplace online where people are selling online. I'd say the art market is still not as transparent as perhaps obviously the blockchain technology that Alex is talking about. There have been galleries for years now, probably at the top end of the market, who've been selling JPEGs to clients just on an email round robin, and they all get sold before the show, and that's been going on.
Selling artworks through sending JPEGs,
Yeah,
because I think selling JPEGs we get into something very different.
No, we will come on to that.
Meaning now.
Yeah, it does. So sorry, I meant exactly selling just a JPEG image of an artwork, a real artwork that's for sale, and that being done all remotely. No physical interaction, just perhaps an email. In the UK and EU, that's known as a off-premises sale or a digital sale. And that's been a concept that's been around now since 2000. It's called distance selling. The art market, however, has resolutely rejected the notion that it is anything like ASOS or buying online to Zara, where there's a cooling off period, where there's a 14-day buyback guarantee. The art market feels that that piece of legislation was never intended, and it's probably correct, never intended for very high value artworks where they're unique and where they're there's an aesthetic feel to it, whereas clothes and shoes, that was the intention behind it. As a result, often buyers don't understand that they have these rights. Galleries will not tell clients that they have these rights because they don't want to have that cash flow disaster of selling perhaps something online or perhaps at a fair, and then it being unwound 14 days later.
Okay, so this is a problem specific to distance selling. That sellers of works are they required to inform the buyer
Correct.
that they have a 14-day
right
of return in the UK and the EU? If they don't tell them that they've got a 14-day right
They
of
have
return?
a year to return the
Well,
artwork.
that is really complicated in an auction house context, isn't it? Because you have this sale and you expect people to take it. I also think that that definition of distance sales, it would be helpful if we really did understand that as digital sales, because when you look at the Art Basel report that you mentioned, I think they've had such a struggle to define what is a digital sale, because is that if you send a JPEG attached to an email, or is it that you're actually on an e-commerce platform and hit buy? What is the difference? So I think in the art market in general, because it was a bit slower and there weren't as many marketplaces, they've often included those email sales as digital sales.
Just for sellers, in terms of sort of caveats and potential pitfalls for them, so what type of precautions do they need to make just on distance sales as we're defining them before they make them?
So this only applies obviously from a business to a consumer. I think clients just need to ask the questions. They have to ask the questions of the galleries: am I going to be at risk? Or the auction houses: am I going to be at risk? Often within the auction house terms and conditions, not so much in the galleries because they don't want you to know about it or think about it. But in the auction houses, they are much more on this, and you will have to agree as a consigner that this sale could get unwound within 14 days if it's bought online. So that is a term. The auction houses are alive to that and aware to it. And I guess, why have I brought up a 20-year-old piece of legislation now? I guess it's because it's even more prevalent and important now in a digital marketplace where there are digital objects being sold. This was relevant back then when you could have gone into the gallery to see it, but you didn't because you were busy or for whatever reason. But now, when everything is digital, then this law still applies to these
something
objects.
that has almost been dormant, but
Exactly.
has suddenly come roaring to life as something that might bite
Exactly.
clients and indeed businesses.
Exactly, and I think that's the exciting, from a legal point of view, and slightly scary point from the NFT world, is that, and I've jumped straight into using the word NFT, and I apologise for doing that because you're going to lead us into that, but it's the fact that these contracts are being created on the blockchain without necessarily lawyers having drafted the contracts, no idea of where they're being actually consummated, what jurisdiction are they taking place in, which law applies. And so there will be a lag, 18-month period when the disputes will start to occur, and then we'll get a better feel for how strong this market's going to be.
We'll come on to that. But before we do, just and quickly, a sense in which, still with you, Rudy, other types of due diligence might be necessary for art businesses working in the digital sphere, so using an online viewing room or similar. So in terms of anti-money laundering legislation still applies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So anti-money laundering does still apply here, again in the UK and in the EU. At the moment, NFTs are not caught by the anti-money laundering regulations. There's a consultation going on at the moment with HMRC whether they should be caught. My feeling is that they will be caught because I think if there is any money laundering happening, it will be in the NFT space, not in necessarily the real art world space. The days of people walking in with a Tesco carrier bag of over 15,000 euros to buy an artwork don't happen, I would think, very often at all. And what was exciting but also potentially worrying, if I was an auction house at Sotheby's or Christie's, they had sort of 80%, I think, of purchases were new bidders that they hadn't ever come across before. Now that obviously does suggest, as Bernadine says, these are new people coming into the market that are excited, and there's a democratization. But equally, as we hear on the grapevine, cryptocurrency is often the trade of perhaps ill-gotten means.
So let's move into this. Yes, of course. So let me ask Aleksandra. I mean, let's move into. We've brushed the surface of the fact that more transactions are happening online. So let's now dive into this linked and more difficult subject in certain ways of buying and selling new types of digital art. Now, the non-fungible tokens can be, they are inscribed on blockchain ledgers, so they rely on blockchain technology, and they can be bought and sold in some instances in cryptocurrency. So to come back to Rudy, is it safe and advisable to buy and sell art using cryptocurrency?
I don't think it's a yes or no question, but it's a very good question. And I think to anyone interested buying digital assets on blockchain, you have several choices, to be honest. So there are marketplaces like Nifty Gateway and Maker's Place that allow you to use fiat, or so to say normal money, to purchase NFTs, where you're not exposed perhaps to some of the risks involving setting up your own wallets. If you really have someone perhaps that can advise you, I would suggest going through the steps of setting up an account, loading some cryptocurrency, setting up a wallet, which allows you to store your potential NFT assets. But there's a certain amount of checklists anyone should be aware of in terms of verifying the accounts from which you purchase, in terms of knowing how to transfer between the accounts, because at the end of the day, it's a new technology and it's a new infrastructure, and the roads are being built right now. So anyone interested in experimenting in this space should do their due diligence.
So we don't know the rules of the road yet on these roads that are being laid as we drive along them.
There are best practices, but there are many people building the future, and it's a very exciting period of time right now.
And Bernadine, on this point about cryptocurrency, you feel that you can have confidence in buying and selling?
Well, I think we talked about trust earlier, and normally trust was built through middlemen traditionally, and what this Web3 infrastructure is trying to build is trust in the technology itself. And that's why it falls outside of a lot of jurisdictions or the way law is written traditionally, because you trust the contract that's been saved in the blockchain. And
because the whole principle of blockchain and crypto is decentralization.
Exactly. And from a bigger point of view, what it's coming from, so we're talking about NFTs today, which is digital artworks using this technology to sell. But actually, this technology can be used in so many different ways, because it's essentially creating trustworthy documents online that you can then trace back. So when you talk about anti-money laundering and those types of issues, I think the legislation needs to be updated, but you can do your due diligence, as Aleksandra was saying. You can go and look at the wallets, figure out where it came from, etc. People can be anonymized, but you can view every single transaction that they have done. So you can do your due diligence and know whether it is something you can trust.
Before we hit NFTs more, just on the transactional side of this, you can do your due diligence, but if you hit the brick wall of an anonymous cryptocurrency wallet, does that ring alarm bells for you, Rudy?
I think absolutely. It rings alarm bells, absolutely. So you have if I was a dastardly criminal and I had some cryptocurrency that I needed to get rid of because I'd got rid of it, I'd gotten it in under questionable circumstances, let's say, putting it politely. There's not many things I can do with this cryptocurrency to clean it and to get some fresh cryptocurrency. NFTs are one of the few things that you can really spend big on to wash perhaps some ill-gotten gains, given the price boom that we've seen in the last 9 months.
But there's also like the DeFi market. You can invest in any of the other tokens. I think there are definitely many applications. And it's the same way as a car can be used to distribute drugs. Like it's, at the end of the day, I think we should not sort of discount the amounts of good it has been doing for the art industry. And
no, I definitely think it's kept the art market alive, interesting. It's evolved it at a really exciting pace. I think it's here to stay, and I'm very pleased it's here to stay. And blockchain has been obviously around for ages, and everyone's been talking about it. And then suddenly, it's got a cool 3-letter name, and now we're all talking about it as if it's something new. But it's obviously been around for a while, and it's got an application that now a majority and a new majority seem to understand. So I think it's very exciting. It's going to be here for the future. It's going to change the art market. But I think in the way that Alex was saying, we're still building the roads. It can be, people will be manipulating that in their own ways, and they may not all be innocent players. So I guess as the lawyer, I just, it's due diligence, it's checking, it's doing your basic DD.
So in the art world, in terms of art sales, am I right in saying that the NFT technology has chiefly been used so far as, in layman's terms, a certificate of authenticity or a certificate of provenance that is attached to something that either asserts its originality or that it's original as part of an edition? Is that?
I would say it's one of the functions of an NFT, but I wouldn't say it's the only one. Because there are many artists who have been experimenting with the nature of the technology itself. In terms of, if you look at, for example, the generative art, you are able to actually store some of the code that is being generated upon mint. So I think what becomes interesting is when we move past simple certification of the artworks and go beyond. For example, I'm working at Frag Color on technology that allows artists to store the works not on a third-party hosting provider, but on the chain itself. And artists are able to create codes that is minted, and it endlessly generates new varieties of artworks. So as a collector, instead of buying a 5-second loop video, you actually can have an endless work of art live on the blockchain itself. So, and the possibilities are endless in terms of the royalty distribution, the commissions people can receive. You have 20 artists working on an artwork. You can split the royalty among 20 of those artists, and whoever wants to adopt the code in the future, the smart contract holds the royalty logic and allows for continuous distribution of that.
So put another way, instead of relying on a centralized artist resale right, each contract on the blockchain can say, actually, if this is sold in 10 or 15 years' time, it's always going to have 10% going to my nominated charity. And that is fundamental to the first point of inscribing it on the blockchain, is it?
There is what has caused the boom was a certain type of standardization that happened. So people agreed across platforms to follow the same smart contract standard, the ERC 721 and then later the ERC 1155, that basically allowed these platforms to interchange these tokens. And that type of standardization facilitates collaboration. And what Aleksandra is alluding to is that we need to make that standardization go even further to protect artists' royalties, to protect all of the things that are important to people. But bear in mind, there are different drivers for different people engaged in this system. You'll have the developers who are developing it, the artists, the buyers, they all have different priorities.
Well, then let me ask, isn't standardization as a notion slightly anathema to the whole of this world that we're talking about?
No, absolutely not, because the standard is not issued by a central authority. The standard is issued by the community. So the decentralized nature is that everyone agrees that this is the standard, and then they buy into it and build their own systems by it. It's a bit like currency in general. I mean, people agreed to a standard of, I'll give you this money and then you'll give me the good. It's now happening on a digital context.
Just to add to that as well, is that the idea of Web3 and the idea of the technology that everyone is building upon is open source. So we're giving, basically, the companies that are developing new technology, they're giving the tools to artists. They can take it, and everyone agrees they're operating in the same standard. But if I don't like the way that this is written, I can essentially fork it. I can make a second version of it and tailor it in my own way, depending on how I want my smart contract to evolve further, or my NFT, or whatever I'm building using the tools available. The issue right now is that many companies that are entering the space, they're saying they're decentralized, but in fact, they're creating sort of those clusters of the metaverse where everything is operable only within them. And what I'm saying is that we need to look forward to the technology that allows it to be open source, where you can jump from one platform to another, and it still would be supported.
Well, and that's, sorry to interrupt, but that's exactly what, when you were talking earlier about the platforms that are walled, where you can actually pay with general currency rather than cryptocurrency, those marketplaces have more power. Whereas if you go in with your cryptocurrency wallet, it's more distributed. It means that the system is more decentralized.
Rudy, art that generates itself, contracts that can fork in different directions, smart or otherwise. This sounds like both a nightmare, regulatory nightmare, and also
smorgasbord for lawyers.
Lucrative for lawyers, potentially.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of these smart contracts haven't necessarily been drafted by lawyers. They've been drafted by tech experts, which and they're not pages and pages and pages long. They're code that have been written into the blockchain that set out some key data, key touch points, like the distribution of commissions, the distribution of royalties, but yeah, it's the lack of standardization at the moment, the lack of clarity on what's acceptable practice, what's not acceptable practice. Those will make it a feeding frenzy, particularly given the amount of money that's involved. So, if this was all being done at a low level with people just selling small whales, then probably it wouldn't reach the register of most. But I think.
Do you think we can expect more regulation in the next decade on this field? Regulation moves pretty slowly compared to the.
Well, exactly, and I think there'll be pushback from the community, because I think that's goes against what the community want. I think it'll take years for the regulators to be able to probably catch up with this, and by the time they catch up, the world would have moved on another 5 years. So the law is always playing catch up in these sorts of very exciting developments. There will be some basic principles that still apply to these objects, despite them being in the ether and no one quite knowing where they are. Courts will try and apply legal principles to them. It just hasn't happened yet, and we'll have to see what the future holds.
But I guess, aren't there parallels with the traditional art market and this new digital art market on the blockchain, that a lot of players believe in self-regulation, believe that their rules are different to if you're buying on Amazon, and they want to write their own rules and feel that they can control themselves and protect their buyers. But the irony is then the term that everyone says is buyer beware. So you kind of, because of the fact that you try and have your own uniqueness and self-regulation, it ends up being that the buyer has to be much more careful.
I think that's right. Or sometimes there's a sense that the art market does think it's unique. There have been cases where there is a belief in the art market that confidentiality is king, and you can have conflicts of interest, and that's just the way the market operates. When those thoughts and ideas reach the courtroom, the court says no. I'm afraid there are rules of engagement. There are rules of how you should be conducting yourselves. There are legal principles in place. And because this is the way the market does it, doesn't mean it's right. And that's where I think we'll get to potentially with NFTs in the next 6 to 9 months.
Bernadine mentioned uniqueness, and I wondered whether just an opportunity to think about how far, I mean, obviously uniqueness is one principle of what can be inscribed in the blockchain. Difficult, big question, but where that sits with what might be traditionally considered aesthetic value or stylistic value or similar. I mean, it has been said in certain places that a lot of this is a movement. We're really talking about a market that's more a type of investment market than, say, a traditional collecting market. Would you agree with that, Alex?
I would say there's a very big difference. Similarly, like we have in the traditional art markets, we have collectibles and we have fine art. And in the NFT space, you could draw a parallel. So if we talk about the context of arts and we disregard the utility NFTs, you can see a very big wave of collectible projects, and then you see more artists' work. So when we talk about the collectible projects, you would often hear things like the Bored Apes or the Cool Cats, where people create collections of tens of thousands of NFTs.
So that's like collecting baseball cards or something.
Exactly, like that. Exactly. And those have seen incredible spikes in value, a lot of speculation. And you have to consider the fact that many people trading those are actually people who come from more crypto trading backgrounds rather than traditional art collectors, although I do see quite a wave of traditional art collectors setting up anonymous Twitter accounts and engaging in this. But at the same time, let's not disregard the fact that a lot of that money is then poured back into the artists who are creating fine blockchain art, or OG, so to say, crypto artists who have been in the space for a very long time, and people consider purchasing them as a historical relevance and value. You would see projects like Curio Cards, like Rare Pepes, like Robness Collection or Max Osiris, some of the biggest, like the most prominent collections you have right now, spiking in value because of their relevance to the ecosystem itself. So there's definitely a value in that market.
I'm going to ask one more question to you, Bernadine, which is that obviously this market, we talked about democratization and open access, but it does come with ethical considerations. We hear a lot about the carbon footprint of mining cryptocurrency, of minting NFTs. Is that sort of just something that's been thrown out of the window with talking about democratization as something to be?
No, I think it's a really good question. And we, at Vastari during the pandemic, obviously there was a lot less going on when it came to traditional exhibitions. So we started assisting through a new entity called Vastari Labs, a lot of cultural institutions experimenting with these types of new projects. And cultural institutions are worried about ethics. They want to look like they are making the right choices and that they don't make any mistakes. And as a result, we've been exploring a lot of these issues that arise. And it's clear that there are issues, but there are solutions. So there is a carbon footprint issue with some of the older blockchains, but there are newer blockchains that are being developed that are much more efficient and can actually have the right standard. Then also there are issues with, for example, value-added tax, when you can't exactly look at which jurisdiction you're in. But there are solutions to be able to do that. And if you want to pay your tax, you'll make sure you'll pay your tax. So I think that you just have to have the right advisors. Aleksandra said earlier about having someone by your side helping you figure this out. I think that is going to be immensely important for people now.
On that note, let me say thank you very much to our speakers, to Rudy Capildeo, to Aleksandra Artamonovskaja, and to Bernadine Bröcker Wieder.